Hi guys, Jonathan here with What Is This Weapon? And this one might catch some of you out because it does resemble quite a bit a different combat shotgun or trench shotgun or military shotgun, let's put it that way. Maybe the more iconic of the fighting shotguns with bayonets attached to them, because yeah, this has a bayonet on it, is the Winchester 1897. I'll bring one out and we'll do a bit of a comparison in a moment. But for now, let's just cover the basics here. So the Winchester Model 12, as in, well, originally called them Winchester Model 1912. I think it was in the 20s where Winchester rebranded, I guess because a lot of their models were aging and it looked a bit bad in the catalogue if they all said like 1897 or, yeah. So they just went for the digits. So model 12 is what it became, but it was the Model 1912 when it was launched. Not available in good old-fashioned 12 gauge, 12 bore, until 1914. So just to confuse matters with the name slightly. So it is absolutely standard from the muzzle, well, kind of. Ignore this bit. This bit and this are just normal Winchester Model 1912 with some significant differences. So for military purposes, like the Winchester 1897, this received a heat shield, sheet metal heat shield on top of the barrel, which is there for use with the bayonet attachment. In fact, it's attached to the bayonet mount. So the mount has 3 large screws here, which is how it attaches. So it just sleeves over the barrel, screws in place with those 3 screws, and the heat shield is springing off the back of that. So it's a fairly easy thing to swap on and off if you needed to, which is partly why there are quite a few fakes of these combat shotguns out there, the 97 and the 1912. And attached to those lugs, of course, is the bayonet, which we'll come back to in a moment. The gun itself, though, is marked militarily very prominently with US and the flaming bomb, as it's usually called, of the US Ordnance Department. That's a standard ownership mark for military equipment, and it's very prominently on the receiver of the firearm. There is also another flaming bomb on the top of the barrel, just like the one on the Action, but smaller. And behind that and on the receiver is the Winchester proof mark, WP, in an oval. We have the serial number on there as well. We have the standard Winchester commercial style markings, Winchester trademark, Model 12, and the fact that it is a 2 3/4 inch chamber marked on the barrel there. That's about it. The bayonet mount does have patent applied for on there, referring to the patent. Interesting, it still says patent applied for because the patent was applied for a while ago, but that is on there nonetheless. Sighting wise, it's a shotgun, so we just have this checkered rib along the top and a nice big brass bead for very quick target acquisition. The bead is just barely visible above the heat shield, but it would be a useful close quarters firing from the hip sight as well, because you very quickly pick that up with the eye. So this is a descendant of John Moses Browning's work, but it is actually designed by Thomas C. Johnson, a very prolific Winchester firearms, or mainly Winchester firearms designer. In fact, there is an excellent article by a friend and colleague, Matthew Moss, over at the Firearm blog, where he goes into various different patents and inventions that Johnson is responsible for. So he's not a one-trick pony with this shotgun. He did work on other stuff, but we're here to look at the shotgun. Now, we're actually doing this as a collaboration with the guys at Real Time History, who are covering the Pacific, specifically the Battle of Saipan, which I'll circle back to later in the video, because I did find a really interesting anecdote from that specific battle that might add to what you'll see if you head over to the Real Time History channel and check out that episode, which I strongly recommend that you do. Before we go any further, let me just pull out, as if by magic, the Winchester 1897, just so that you can see. I mean, they are pretty superficially similar, especially as they have the exact same Although the number of holes on the heat shield can vary, but these two have the same one fitted, and the mount is the same. They really do look rather similar, and they are, you know, this is a development essentially of this. But we do have the visibly two-part bolt through the ejection opening, and we do have an external hammer. Now, this one is actually in such a sorry state that the bolt is seized in place. But if you look at video of this operating, the bolt actually sticks right out of the back of the gun to cock the hammer there. So it's a little, if your grip's a bit high, you can whack yourself in the web of the hand with the bolt. It's not as evolved a design as the Model 12. This really is a direct replacement for this in various ways. Although this thing did hang on into the Second World War era. Internally, the big change here was to a tilting bolt, which you can see as I pull back the pump grip there. The back end of this bolt is dropping down out of its locking shoulder. So when it's forward, it's locked up, an engagement with the rear of the case. As you pull this back, it drops down at the rear, and it comes back like that, much like something like the later FAL rifle. So a different system to the 1897, where you've got it where it's unlocking and it's shooting out the back of the gun. That means you can sort of streamline the whole thing beyond just the hammer spur, and it really gives the gun a modern look to it. If you want to know more about the mechanism of this thing, I can find you the patent drawing. You can also check out the Midway USA channel, where they actually make a cutaway of one of the civilian guns. So if you're interested in the nitty-gritty of how it works, but from the user point of view, it's just a pump-action shotgun. Speaking of the Winchester 1897, there is a bit of a misconception there that this was, it's not a misconception. It is a combat shotgun by design, you know, as is the Model 12, the heat shield and the bayonet mount. And let's reveal the bayonet properly there. Those absolutely are designed to allow a soldier to grasp this and use it as a bayonet handle, just like on a rifle. However, it wasn't significantly used in the First World War. Andrew Stalinsky has done some fantastic research on the 1897 in the First World War, and although the Germans complained about it, and it did see field trials where it really was taken on trench raids and such, it never actually saw official issue. Not because of what the Germans said, but because it was found to be a bit hit and miss as to, is this really worth giving to soldiers rather than a rifle, or even a knife and a pistol, as was often done. Some units loved it, some hated it, some weren't so sure about it. So it was used, it was procured by the US military, the 1897 that is, as a weapon for guarding prisoners. The bayonet is a very effective persuader, whether you want them to stay where they are or go somewhere else. So it's for guarding prisoners. But it did see use in the First World War as a combat shotgun and gained the nickname trench gun as a result. And this, it's fair to say, is really where it takes off. The 97 was used in the Philippines as a combat shotgun, more so than in the First World War. And it and this were used in the Second World War as a straight-up combat shotgun, including on Saipan, at Saipan. Now, obviously, if these guns had been designed purely for guarding prisoners, you wouldn't need a heat shield, because you can just hold the barrel isn't going to heat up if you're not shooting rounds through this thing, so it wouldn't need the heat shield. No, the design intent was absolutely to assault trenches, go into close quarter spaces, great for the jungle, anything where the effective engagement range is not too far out. There is a lot of misconception over the effectiveness of shotguns, largely due to movies, TV, video games. They're often depicted as absolutely devastating at very close range, which is true, and then almost worthless beyond that, and usually with a huge spread as well. But even with a cylinder bore as this has, where there's no choke to constrain the shot pattern, the pattern at 20 meters, which I would say, finger in the air, is a good effective range for a weapon like this. It's still going to be, they're going to stay reasonably close together. There are some good other videos on YouTube showing shot patterns from 12 gauge shotguns that will give you an idea of what this thing is really capable of.
All right, so there's our World War I trench gun. This is 10 yards, and that's what, 4 inches? Maybe 5 inches?
It's probably closer to 5 across there.
That's not bad. There's your wad.
And it's got decent dispersion too.
Yeah, it seems like I don't want to get hit by that.
Oh, hell no.
That's an effective impact right there.
But it definitely gives you a somewhat increased chance of hitting the enemy, because it's not a bullet this big, it's a shot pattern this big to maybe that big. And then if you do hit them, you're hitting them with, you know, more than one roughly 32 caliber piece of lead. So if it's only 1 or 2, then okay, that's not massively effective. But if you get them with, hit the enemy with half or more of that shot pattern, they are, yeah, these are absolutely devastating at close range. Yes, they're less useful at longer range, and one of the reasons why they're not more widely used is that soldiers can't typically carry a rifle and a shotgun. Now with Saipan, I believe 1 in 2 Marines was carrying his service rifle and a shotgun with a bayonet on it, which is a little bit unusual. Gives you the flexibility to engage at close quarters and then at longer range, but at the cost of a great big burden of 2 large, heavy, long weapons and the ammunition that you need to feed them. Now, you could, of course, dismount the bayonet, but when it comes time to use this shotgun, you're probably, I would guess, going to want to mount the bayonet to it. But the bayonet would be carried on the belt, just like a normal bayonet, making this thing a little bit more flexible and better for close quarters, ironically. But I think, you know, psychologically and as a backup in case your 8 rounds run out, you really can't argue with this thing. There's something just very intimidating and evocative about the shotgun with a bayonet on the end of it. Very, very purposeful looking thing. Speaking of the bayonet, now that has US service markings on it as well, because it is a US bayonet, unsurprisingly, but it's a British pattern of bayonet. And the lineage is basically the pattern 1907 SMLE bayonet, which is actually derived from the Japanese Arasaka bayonet. That gets adapted, or the blade form and the hilt is adapted to the pattern 1914 British rifle and the model 1917 US rifle. It's essentially a license-produced British bayonet for a license-produced British rifle in an American caliber. And that is because this mount is designed for the 1897, where this bayonet was interchangeable with the service rifle of the day, that carries over to the Model 12. So it's a little quirky that they didn't just redesign this for the standard, for the new standard US bayonet. Having said that, this is a great fighting bayonet for this kind of purpose, keeping the enemy at beyond arm's reach, basically. Very, very long and slim, effective for penetrating the body. Later, like Second World War era bayonets, like the Garand bayonet, they're more like a utility knife, or at least they're shorter and stumpier. They're less suitable for something like this. So this, I guess it stands to reason that a design for something to mount a bayonet to a shotgun would be an original piece of design, and so there is a patent for this. So if you, we will throw this up on the screen for you. Henry Brewer was the designer of the bayonet mount for the original 1897, which, as I say, carries over straight onto this, so it's relevant here as well. There is one other modification that's made to the Model 12 to make it a military weapon, and that is a set of sling swivels, rifle-style sling swivels for a rifle sling. Typically, shotguns don't have sling attachment points, or if they do, they are the sporting style that's a bit less obtrusive. So this one is actually missing its front swivel. The rear swivel is there. If we pull up our 1897, you can see the sort of swivel that's supposed to be hanging from this hole here. So this is actually a nice example, but it is missing its front sling swivel. There is one change with this Henry Brewer designed the heat shield on the bayonet mount. The mount stays the same, but the heat shield here reduces the number of holes. So the wartime, the First World War vintage 1897 heat shield has 6 rows of cooling holes on here. The World War II version has 4. So our 1897 is fitted with the same World War II vintage 4 rows of holes. 1, 2, 3, 4. There is a quirk of this era of military shotgun, which is the ammunition. So it's completely normal, still in use today, 12 gauge, 12 bore ammunition. But at this time, the standard type of shell of hull was paper, cardboard, compressed. Pretty thick, robust stuff. We have a fired shell here. This is a British Ely case. And the end is opened out, has been fired, and you can see how thick that is. This is reasonably robust. It's fine for civilian purposes and potentially fine for some military applications. But if you were to take this to, well, basically anywhere moist, the trenches of the Western Front in the First World War would be a problem for these. And certainly on Guadalcanal in 1943-4, they found that these were swelling. And if this swells, so it's attracting moisture, this is getting thicker. Now that might mean you can't even get it into the magazine tube. Or if you do get it in there and you leave this thing overnight, which you're probably going to, keeping it loaded, it's going to swell in the chamber. And you'll fire it, and that might be enough to dislodge, but you might find it's actually stuck in the chamber. So right away it was recommended that, as well as a brass case head, you would have a brass sheet body hull for this as well. But that seems to have been very slow to be implemented. So by the time of Saipan, which is what the real-time history guys are looking at, they are still being issued shells that could stick in the shotgun. And if you have a manually operated weapon that you have to pump every single time you need to fire, and it doesn't pump, you are in trouble, albeit you do have the backup of the bayonet. Now, allegedly at Saipan, the purpose of issuing Marines with the shotguns was to prevent friendly fire, shooting your fellow Marines in the back who are further ahead in front of you because of that limit, that stereotypical limited range of the shotgun. It's not what the video games would lead us to believe. And it's certainly like lethal energy well out beyond 50 yards or whatever, but there is a spread of shot there. There is a reduction in fall off in velocity. It doesn't carry for thousands of yards with lethal energy like a rifle bullet does. So allegedly that was the main reason that they were there, but they were used very much as fighting weapons. The situation with the 8th Marines apparently was that all their shotguns went to one company. So it was Captain Carl Hoffman, Company G, 2nd Battalion, landing on Green 2 Beach, which gave that company a ratio of 1 shotgun to every 2 Marines. And that's how they ended up with 1 in every 2 Marines carrying a rifle and a shotgun. That would not have been the normal pattern of issue by any means, but they took full advantage of the fact that they had these additional weapons available to them. And we have this really nice quote from Hoffman himself. "We were glad that we were armed with shotguns, because the entire beach that we were moving along was a honeycomb of World War I type open trenches. The Japanese were in these open trenches and had survived the bombardment from naval gunfire. And they were ready to fight. So we had a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, and there's nothing more effective in hand-to-hand fighting than shotguns. Many of the Japanese were ready to do battle with bayonets or even sabres." And that's from the book Saipan, 1944. Fighting fire with fire, really, or blade with blade. So there is this warrior tradition, of course, in Japan that bled into the military, that bayonets would be fitted to as many weapons as possible. Officers would carry and use swords, and so we have the stories of terrifying charges of Japanese soldiers armed with edged weapons. Well, one way to receive that is with a rifle with a bayonet, but a shotgun with a bayonet at closer quarters is arguably even more effective. There is a substantial legacy for this particular design as well. These were still around for Korea, not that many years after the Second World War, and Vietnam as well, although the Ithaca 37 and the Stevens 77 were both more common, I believe, as fighting shotguns. The jungles of Vietnam are fairly ideal terrain for the use of combat shotguns. So this thing was soldiering on there as well. Now, 2 million of these things were made, but the vast majority were civilian, commercial. Having said that, 60 to 80,000 of the military variant were made 1941 to 1944. So that's not insignificant. Far more significant, I would say, than the actual issue and combat use of the 1897. So although that seems to be the more iconic trench gun, I'd say this probably should be the trench gun that we think of. And of course, it doesn't end with Vietnam. The combat shotgun or the military shotgun has consistently had a niche, whether that's blowing off door hinges or punching through locks purely to gain entry into a space, or whether they're actually being carried and used as combat weapons. The British Army had the L128A1 combat shotgun.
Something big, bold.
Benelli M4. That was ultimately not brought into core service after Afghanistan, but it did see issue and use in Afghanistan, and is the modern version of this, albeit semi-automatic and not mounting a bayonet. The idea of a combat shotgun with a bayonet fitted has probably gone away for good, I would say. But the fighting shotgun will persist. We're seeing it in, well, we've seen it in all sorts of conflict zones. Libya in 2011-ish. It's in use in Ukraine right now, with a potential new lease of life as an anti-drone weapon, although opinions vary on just how good shotguns are for fighting against drones or defending against drones. I did get the opportunity to shoot a counter-drone shotgun a while back, firing a sort of bolo-style net that would entangle the rotors and bring it down that way. I wasn't shooting a drone, unfortunately, but got a sense of how far away you might need to be, which is worryingly close, I think. And then just number 6 birdshot or something might well be enough to take down the plastic propeller blades, rotor blades of a drone. There are other specialist loads. There are other specialist guns. There's even a sort of sidearm size shotgun-based system that can be used to last ditch down a drone. There's been a large purchase of Turkish shotguns of a particular type by the Ukrainian armed forces to see if those can be used for this purpose. The ongoing issue is these are great for, if you're just fighting in trenches, just fighting in the jungle, they're fine. Or in urban areas, they're fine. If you have to then switch to a weapon with a longer range, that's where the problem is. So a rifle is always going to be more versatile for you than a shotgun. That said, I don't see them going away anytime soon. The old-fashioned pump action is probably dead as a military weapon, except maybe for breaching. But the 12-gauge shotgun will live for some time to come. Thanks for watching this episode, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. As ever, we do have a website. I know, very forward-thinking. Various links on there. You can check out our bricks and mortar sites that we have here in the UK. Social media channels are relatively new and quite successful TikTok channel you can check out as well. I am still doing my thing over on GameSpot, and we are part of the History of Weapons and War app with a load of other really good content creators as well. You can find all the same videos as here, but ad-free, and maybe with some longer form versions going up there as well that we don't have time for here on YouTube. That's certainly what we're intending to do anyway. But however you find us, please come back here to this channel again next week.